Okay, so we're diving into the life and really tragic death of Dr. Amy Harwick. She was a Hollywood therapist. She helped people get out of toxic relationships, but sadly, she ended up becoming a victim herself.
It makes you wonder, why isn't knowing the signs always enough to actually break free? I think this one is going to be tough, but really important.
Absolutely.
Especially with all the stuff you pulled together, court transcripts and interviews and news articles, even like Amy's own social media.
It's a lot, yeah.
It's going to be quite a deep dive.
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning with Amy's childhood.
Okay.
Born in Pennsylvania, adopted at just 11 months old. But what's interesting is, even from a young age, she was fascinated by human behavior.
Oh, wow. So almost foreshadowing, right?
Yeah.
That early interest in understanding, what makes people tick, it seems to have always been there. And it's kind of poignant, thinking about her later career.
Totally. And she was ambitious, moved to LA at 20, this incredible drive, juggling, modeling, and even dancing while going to college.
Mm-hmm. It shows her resilience, right? That hustle to create a life for herself. We often associate Hollywood with glamour.
Yeah.
But Amy's early experiences probably gave her a real understanding of the pressures and vulnerabilities people face kind of behind the scenes.
For sure. She eventually marries a musician, gets her degree in psychology, seems like she's on this good path, and then there's a major setback. Leaked explicit photos from her past lead to her losing a job.
It's so infuriating how often women are judged and punished for things that happened years earlier, often with no bearing on their current abilities.
Yeah.
It's just not fair.
It's not.
Like, how is that fair?
Totally, but Amy, ever resilient, channeled that experience into her work.
Wow.
She goes on to get her PhD, becomes Dr. Amy, the sex and relationship therapist. It's almost like she used that as fuel to help others.
Exactly. And she didn't shy away from difficult topics or populations either. Working with sex workers, advocating for mental health, really pushing to break down those stigmas.
A true advocate, but unfortunately this is where her story takes that dark turn we talked about.
Yep.
Enter Gareth Pursehouse. At first he seemed charming, but there was this underlying possessiveness, their relationship filled with these very public displays of affection that almost seemed to cross the line into controlling behavior.
It's like that classic pattern, right? You see it in so many abusive relationships. The abuser starts by showering the victim with attention, making them feel special, and then it morphs into possessiveness and isolation from their support system.
And with Gareth, it escalated. He became physically violent. Amy filed police reports detailing horrific abuse. Choking, being slammed to the ground, even being pushed out of a moving car.
The police reports are terrifying. And it's even more disturbing when you consider the power imbalance.
Yeah.
Gareth was significantly larger than Amy, which just adds another layer of fear to those violent acts.
Absolutely. Amy tried to break free, filed for restraining orders, but sadly, as we see so often, the legal system didn't offer the protection she needed.
It's the heartbreaking reality for so many victims of domestic violence. The process of getting a restraining order can be challenging and re-traumatizing, and abusers often find ways to manipulate the system or even intimidate victims into dropping charges. It makes you wonder if Amy's expertise in this area, her deep understanding of these toxic patterns, maybe made it even harder for her to leave.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Like maybe she blamed herself for getting caught in this cycle.
It's like she knew all the red flags helped others escape these situations, but why couldn't she protect herself?
It really underscores the fact that abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of their intelligence, their background, even their profession.
So Amy finally breaks up with Gareth, but instead of it being the end, it seems like it was just the beginning of his obsession. He breaks into her apartment, vandalizes her property, starts spreading nasty rumors about her.
Classic stalking behavior. He couldn't handle the rejection, so he resorted to these tactics to try and regain control over her, trying to isolate her further by damaging her reputation, her relationships.
It really does sound like something out of a psychological thriller.
Totally.
And Amy was clearly terrified. She even told friends that she feared for her safety.
That's chilling, and those fears were completely valid. Stalking often escalates to more serious violence. It's a huge red flag that should never be ignored.
Then a glimmer of hope enters her life. She meets and falls in love with Drew Carey. They get engaged. It seems like maybe she's finally found some happiness and security.
Yeah, it's interesting how that high-profile relationship plays into this whole narrative. On one hand, you can imagine the sense of safety and security it might have brought, but on the other, it also exposed her to a whole new level of public scrutiny.
Right, and that pressure of that attention seemed to be too much.
Yeah.
She breaks off the engagement partly due to concerns for her safety, and it's around this time that she starts noticing strange occurrences, things missing from her home files, deleted from her computer.
It's almost like Gareth was lurking in the background even during her relationship with Drew. This pattern of escalating harassment, it's terrifying. It demonstrates his inability to let go and his fixation on controlling her, even from a distance.
So unsettling, like she was trying to rebuild her life after escaping this dangerous relationship.
But her past was about to catch up to her in the most horrific way imaginable.
Let's pause here for a moment. When we come back, we'll delve into those final chapters of Amy's story, the events leading up to her death and the trial that followed. So we left off with Amy trying to, rebuild her life, unaware of the danger just around the corner. It's 2020, and she's speaking at this adult industry awards show, ironically, on a panel about mental health, and guess who shows up?
Gareth. And not quietly, from what we've gathered. He causes a scene yelling at her, accusing her of hypocrisy, even collapsing on the floor like a full-on meltdown.
It's hard to imagine what was going through Amy's mind in that moment, like a nightmare come to life.
It's pathetic and terrifying at the same time. He couldn't handle seeing her move on, succeed without him. His obsession had just completely consumed him.
Amy, being the ultimate professional, tries to de-escalate the situation. She even apologizes to him.
Oh, wow.
Which is just a testament to her character, but also incredibly sad.
It's like she's just trying to neutralize the threat. But it speaks to that burden society often places on women. This expectation to appease and pacify even when they're the ones being wronged.
That night, she sends herself an email detailing the encounter and her fears. And it's bone-chilling because it reads like a premonition.
Oh, gosh. Can you share some of what she wrote?
Yeah, she writes, "It terrifies me that he's been obsessed with me for 9 years. He thinks about me every day and throws tantrums. He's malicious, highly intelligent, and focused on harming me."
It's haunting, especially knowing what happens next.
I know.
This email is more than just documentation of her fear. It's like a desperate attempt to protect herself, to create a record in case the worst should happen.
And she does take steps to protect herself. She shares her location with friends, increases her home security, starts carrying pepper spray. She was doing everything right.
And that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case. Amy was proactive, she sought help, she documented the abuse, she tried to move on, yet it still wasn't enough to stop a determined abuser.
2 weeks later, Valentine's Day, Amy goes out for a Galentine's celebration with friends. She's texting, laughing, making plans, and then silence.
That contrast is almost unbearable to think she was enjoying her evening, completely unaware of what awaited her at home.
Her roommate Michael is asleep in the basement when he's awakened by the sounds of a struggle. Amy screams the sound of someone being choked and thrown to the ground.
It's important to remember the chaos of that moment for Michael, right? He's in the dark, doesn't know what's happening, how many people are involved. He calls out to Amy, but there's no answer.
And he can't find his phone. He ends up running outside and flagging down a passerby to call 911. But the dispatcher, well, let's just say they weren't very helpful.
Yeah, the 911 call is incredibly frustrating to listen to. You can hear the panic in Michael's voice. But the dispatcher keeps asking seemingly irrelevant questions, delaying the response.
When police finally arrive, they're initially suspicious of Michael. He's got blood on his shirt from climbing the fence. He's acting erratically. Precious time is lost, convincing them to jump the fence and investigate.
It highlights the challenges first responders often face in these situations, right? They have to assess the scene, ensure their safety, try to piece together what's happened. But in this case, those lost minutes were likely crucial.
They finally reach the back patio and find Amy lying on the ground 20 feet below her balcony. She's alive, but barely.
The scene is chaotic paramedics, struggling to navigate the narrow streets, and what they find, scattered belongings, broken beads from a necklace, even a pool of urine. Imagine the terror Amy must have felt.
It's almost too painful to think about.
And then there's the syringe found on the balcony, adding to the confusion. At first, police suspected a drug overdose, maybe even suicide. But the evidence quickly revealed a very different story.
The autopsy revealed defensive wounds on Amy's hands and arms, bruising on her neck, consistent with strangulation, multiple blunt force traumas. This wasn't an accident, it was a brutal attack.
And that syringe, it wasn't heroin as initially thought, but liquid nicotine, a substance that if injected can be highly lethal. This is where the premeditation becomes clear. Gareth didn't just snap. He planned this.
But the question remained, how did he get in? What happened in those final moments?
Security footage from a neighbor's home provides those missing pieces. It shows Gareth wearing gloves, carrying a bag, sneaking onto the property hours before Amy arrived. He was clearly trying to avoid detection.
He breaks in through a glass door, that's the sound Michael heard, and disappears inside. Later footage captures him fleeing the scene just minutes after Amy is thrown from the balcony.
It's like watching a true crime documentary unfold, except this was real life with real consequences. And it gets even more disturbing when you learn that throughout the evening, while supposedly distraught over the deaths, Amy Gareth was casually texting other women.
He even sent one woman a good morning text just hours after Amy's death, like he was completely detached from the horror he had inflicted.
It's chilling. A complete lack of remorse. A hallmark of so many abusers. They see themselves as the victim, justifying their actions, minimizing the pain they've caused.
The evidence was overwhelming: DNA, security footage, eyewitness accounts, even Amy's own email documenting her fear. But the defense team came up with some truly baffling arguments.
Their strategy, victim blaming, trying to shift the focus from Gareth's actions onto Amy's supposed choices.
They suggested Amy, distraught over the encounter at the awards show, might have attempted suicide by jumping from the balcony. They even presented a photo of her sitting on a railing to suggest this was typical behavior.
It's outrageous, completely disregarding the evidence of strangulation, defensive wounds, the fact that Gareth was inside her home, lying in wait with a lethal weapon.
They also suggested that maybe Amy was the aggressor attacking Gareth out of fear, and he acted in self-defense.
Again, shifting the blame, attempting to paint Amy as unstable, even dangerous. It's a tactic often used to undermine victims' credibility and create doubt in the minds of the jury.
But thankfully, the jury saw through those claims. After 2 days of deliberation, they returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, with the special circumstance of lying in wait, justice for Amy.
It's a moment of relief, but also profound sadness. Amy's life was cut short, her potential unrealized, all because of a man who couldn't accept her right to say no.
The impact statements from Amy's family and friends are truly heartbreaking. They paint a picture of a vibrant, compassionate woman who dedicated her life to helping others.
And they really highlight the devastating ripple effect of domestic violence. It's not just the victim who suffers, it's everyone they love, their community, even society as a whole.
Drew Carey, even years after their breakup, was devastated. He called Amy a positive force in the world and said he was overcome with grief.
It's a reminder that even though relationships end, the impact someone has on our lives can be lasting, and in Gareth's case,
Well, he showed no remorse during a recorded jailhouse visit with friends. He's heard laughing and joking about his newfound notoriety. It's sickening.
it's chilling, isn't it? This callous indifference to the pain he caused. It confirms that his actions weren't driven by love, but by this twisted need for control and revenge.
Gareth was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a small consolation, but at least he can't hurt anyone else.
True, but it doesn't bring Amy back, nor does it erase the trauma inflicted on her loved ones and the fear that countless other victims of domestic violence continue to endure. So what happens next? What does Amy's story teach us, and how can we honor her memory? Let's explore those questions right now.
It's really hard to grasp the full weight of this story. You know, someone so dedicated to helping others, who literally wrote the book on healthy relationships, falls victim to such horrific violence.
Yeah, it's a tragic paradox, and it really gets to the heart of this whole deep dive. Domestic violence doesn't care who you are, what you know, or what you do. It thrives in secrecy, often hidden behind closed doors.
And that's why talking about it is so important. You know, we need to shatter the silence, challenge those societal norms that keep victims from coming forward.
Absolutely. We need to create a culture where victims feel safe and supported, where they are believed, and where abusers are held accountable. No more sweeping it under the rug.
Amy's loved ones were determined to make that happen. They launched a campaign for reforms to California's restraining order laws.
Oh, wow.
Imagine if those orders were permanent, providing ongoing protections so victims wouldn't have to constantly face their abusers in court.
It would be a huge game changer. I mean, those temporary restraining orders, they offer a sliver of protection, but imagine the peace of mind a permanent order could provide.
Right, and they didn't stop there. They pushed for mandatory counseling for abusers, aiming to address the root causes of that behavior.
It's a complex issue, but forcing abusers to confront their actions and undergo treatment, it could be a powerful tool for prevention.
Right.
It's not just about punishment, it's about breaking the cycle of violence.
They even advocated for a national registry of abusers similar to the sex offender registry. That way people could be aware of someone's history of violence.
That's a bold proposal for sure. It raises questions about privacy and due process, but it also speaks to that desperate need for more preventative measures. You know, knowledge is power, and in this case, it can be life-saving.
Sadly, the momentum for these reforms stalled when the pandemic hit. But Amy's story continues to inspire people to fight for change. It hasn't been forgotten.
And it reminds us that we need constant education and awareness around this issue. We need to start young, teaching people about healthy relationships, recognizing those red flags, debunking the myths that perpetuate violence.
It really stuck with me when we learned about the woman who briefly dated Gareth after he and Amy broke up.
Yeah.
She had no idea about his past and felt so guilty, wondering if staying with him might have saved Amy's life.
That's a common reaction, but it's so misplaced. Easy to get caught up in the what ifs, but ultimately the abuser is responsible for their actions, not the victims or those who cross their paths.
Amy's story is both heartbreaking and inspiring. She was a force for good, and her work continues to have an impact. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, resilience and the desire to help others can shine through.
It's a testament to her strength, but it also reminds us that we all have a role to play in ending domestic violence. We can support victims, challenge abusive behavior, and advocate for policies that prioritize safety and accountability. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to change.
Something really powerful in all of this is a message Amy shared in one of her last social media posts.
Oh, wow.
She urged everyone to reflect on our ideas of romantic love. She emphasized that we have much control over the partners we pick and how we move forward in our romantic relationships.
It's as if she was giving us all a final piece of advice, reminding us that we have the power to choose healthy relationships, break free from toxic patterns, and work towards a world where love doesn't mean control or violence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you from Amy's story? What questions were you left with?
For me, it's just a stark reminder that awareness is just the first step we need to continue to educate ourselves, support victims, and challenge the systems that perpetuate violence.
We encourage you to keep exploring this topic, learn from Amy's story, and become an advocate for change. Even small actions like donating to an organization that supports victims of domestic violence can make a difference.
And if you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out for help. There are resources available. You are not alone.
This has been a heavy but essential deep dive. Amy's life and legacy deserve to be remembered, and her story has the power to ignite real change. Thank you for joining us.